Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello and welcome to Expedition Self. I'm Sam Parrotto, and our topic today is, ready? The colossal nature of fear. Gosh, I'm going to take a deep breath because this is going to be, I think, a pretty loaded conversation we're going to have. You know, one of the things I was thinking just as I was getting ready to get on air is that I recognize that those of you who are listening, it's likely that many of you are lifelong seekers and learners. So some of the things that you're hearing, you probably already think about and know. What I always hope on my show is that as you listen and your psyche takes it all in, that whatever that next thing is that you need to move yourself along, to find more freedom, that some way or another that's going to shake loose in our conversation. So I hope that that works that way for you. And I want to give you the phone number when you can call in, because, you know, I love it when people call in and give me a sense of what they're doing with what we're talking about, and also what's happening in your life. The number is 202-570-7057. You know, there's a ton we might feel afraid about right now. I think it's hard to shake off and hard to be with. And, you know, it's not readily apparent where the unconscious tendrils will ultimately land that are weaving inside of us as we're trying to deal with all that's shaking up our way of life and our understanding of our place amidst society. I think we overexpect ourselves to roll through things. And when that happens, we don't set ourselves up well to actually process and complete what's needed to move on to the next experience. There's just really everything that's going on in the world. And I know I feel it at a belly level. So I just want to pause here for a moment and honor the fact that you and I are dealing with all of this. Whatever your this is, your family and friends are dealing with it, and it's an enormous weight. And just for 10 seconds before we get started, I'd like you to appreciate yourself for being in your life and being you and taking care of all the things you take care of and for showing up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds of appreciating you. So my show is all about helping you go inside. So I was thinking about that this week, and I realized that for many of us, we walk around the circumference of ourselves and don't consistently, like every minute, drop in. And I know life has a way of causing or actually forcing us to go inside when major events shake us up. But at those moments, we really have no choice but to feel them because they're so overwhelming, you know, beyond our normal kind of occupational framework. But for the most part, we tend to shy away from feeling, and then we don't feel what's beneath that. And then we don't follow those thoughts that are nestled within the feelings, and we don't search the corners and ends of our lifetime looking for those connections that will help us embody the other 95% of our unconscious self that's awaiting discovery. This is the kind of dropping in that happens every single day, where this internal information is being collected constantly, where we mine our psyches and bodies for the treasures from the past, and we sit in curiosity wondering, why did I feel this? Or what's happening with me that I reacted that way? Or how did this become so significant? And why did I get defensive about it or sensitive? These inner questions are a big part of going inside. And it's so easy, right, to just let life give you your daily lessons, like deliver them easily, rather than being an engaged student of your own journey. This is what I want for people, because I think it produces a healthier, more powerful, kind of more vital way of being in the world. And we resonate at a higher frequency because living lives that we're deeply pleased with also translates to having more of ourselves available to others and to the world. So today I invite you to go inside as we embark on the exploration of fear. So you're going to ask your own questions. You might even want to journal afterwards and see if you can really be with whatever shows up as we weave and wind our way through the conversation. And of course, please know, I'm going to do one more plug here, that you can call in and share your insights or thoughts or questions with me. You know, I love that. All right. So I'd like to share a few of the things I've learned about fear along my journey. And I've even numbered them, which I never do kind of numbered lists. But here's the first one. It's as basic to being human as emotions and thinking. And yet we do everything in our power to get rid of it. Number 2, we need to befriend it, or like most things, it will stay underground and influence us without us realizing it. Number 3, some of our fear is like a neon sign, flashing, showing us the way to where healing and learning is needed for ourselves or possible. It like has a purpose. Number 4, when we work with our fear, we pay attention to the self, and this is an innately loving action. When we try to get rid of it, the self undergoes this sense of abandonment that you probably aren't even conscious of. So you're inadvertently and unknowingly sending a signal to the self that it is in some way unacceptable. That word's hard to say, because it has fear. Okay, there's just one more. So the 5th one is a commitment to expansion in life will absolutely bring up fear, because the scope and the parameters of our current life is what it is because the fear exists. Okay, I want to actually help this one get a little fuller. So let's see if you can visualize this. If you look at everything that's part of your life, where you live, what you talk about, who you stay connected with, the way you work, the ideas you'll consider, the rigid places of your thinking, that is the scope of your life. And if you attempt to make any change within this scope, it lies outside of that perimeter. And so as a result, the minute you push on that, fear is going to come up. So given all of that, it's no surprise that I describe fear as this colossal thing, right? It shows up in the body, the mind, the emotions. We're afraid of what we don't know. We're afraid of what we can't see. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid of feeling. We're afraid of loss, afraid of appearing dumb, afraid of being humiliated. I know I got a long list here. Afraid of losing control, afraid of dying, afraid of hurting others, afraid of seeming inconsiderate, afraid of being bad. Yeah, the list, it just goes on, because fear has so many faces. And you know, it's often tied to a fear of something specific that's actually happened in your life. I'll bet if I gave you 30 seconds, you could think of 3 events instantly that left you feeling fear. It also links directly to the fact that we are human. Like 3 capital A-R-E, are human, right? We're not in control of how it goes for us. We're provided a finite time that's been allotted to us in our human form. And it's one that we have no clue of how long we're going to have it. So we're often afraid of other people and their judgments or their actions that result from those judgments. We're afraid of feeling and being overwhelmed by it. And this is really important. We wage war with it because we want supremacy and control and dominance over our fear, because in its colossal complexity, it already feels like it's got that on us. So I want to tell you about this. When I was 34, I studied fear for a year. Hey, that rhymes. Don't you just love it when words all of a sudden somehow accidentally fall into like perfect placement? Okay, back to my year of studying fear. So I am someone who gravitates to strength stories. I'm moved by them. But by that time, I would wake up every morning feeling this sense of panic in my chest. And I wanted to know exactly what was happening. I wanted to understand where fear lived in me and what actually prompted it. Okay, you're probably thinking, who the heck does that, right? Who intentionally wants to feel fear? Well, as I began to pay close attention, it was like everywhere. If I was doing anything that brought about physical risk, I felt it. If I was in a conversation with another person that might be met by defensiveness or anger or some adverse reaction, I felt fear. If I thought my words would cause some loss or impact, I'd register fear. If I made mistakes or I didn't handle something properly, I was afraid of getting in trouble. And I've got to tell you, it was a weakening sense in my body. And underneath all of that, I lived with this foreboding about what was going to happen to me next, what danger lurked behind the next day, and what couldn't I see or recognize in another's words. And that would eventually cause me to be at risk, in some way. Now, again, if I wasn't studying it, I don't think I would have seen all of this. So each morning when I'd wake up, if I got really in touch, I was afraid of the unknown that I'd face throughout the day. Vulnerability or weakness of any kind brought on fear. Let me tell you, this was a pretty interesting year for me. I realized that I withheld my truth from conversations that had the potential to change my level of safety and security, and I began to find ways to get my words moving, right? I'm in touch with my fear, and then I realized one of the things that was happening, right, was me not speaking up for myself. I went back and I did a whole bunch of work around what happened when I got in trouble as a little girl and how that affected my sense of being safe and secure and unafraid. And then I looked at how I managed the maintenance and care of my lifestyle, what needed to be dealt with in a more proactive way. And so rather than continuing to avoid or procrastinate, because I really connected it with feeling fear in my body, I started to make different choices. And the last part was I saw how my fear of death and pain was playing a role in what I wouldn't participate in or how I held myself out. So miraculously, or maybe not so miraculously, at the end of it, I was able to wake up each day without that tightness in my chest. It was a big deal. It was a year I actually will never forget. Because I had welcomed fear, I sought it out, I teased out the embedded pieces, and without realizing it, I then felt inside me honored and celebrated and seen. Like my renewed relationship with my fear made me feel like someone who actually deserved compassion. I actually felt love for myself. Have you ever noticed this in your life, that when you stop making something a bad thing and you actually turn towards it, that you value what it's bringing to you, that then you, the whole you, actually feels more acceptable and wanted. And it really wasn't even the goal. It just happened, inside of your own process. So that year of fear, it led me to so many going inside places that grew me into more of myself. It was super fruitful and rewarding. And yes, here it is. It was totally uncomfortable. So, at this point, I am totally on, I know it's going to blow your mind that I'm going to say this, but I am on team fear, right? Because I really got to alter my relationship with it. So here's some more on fear. Actually, I want to hold on that. So we're about ready to get closer and closer to the break. So I would really love to hear some other people's stories, those of you who are listening, about how you have come into relationship with fear or how you struggle with that battle, that war that I was talking about waging. So the phone number that you'd call in is 202-570-7057. And what will happen is then when we come back from break, we will get to talk to you and see what you think. So a couple things that I just have noticed over time is that the study oh my gosh, could I not say that word? The study of trauma has begun to make its way into the more mainstream conversation. And, I'm no trauma expert, but I do firmly believe that we've all felt some form of trauma and didn't acknowledge or discern or process it. I think we feel more disassociation because we couldn't handle the amount of fear we felt than we realize. And that disassociation is part of what is at the, it's at the end of the rainbow when we go inside, because we get to reconnect with those aspects of ourself that might be standing separately as a result of it. So shock and surprise and psychic, like the disruption, all trigger fear. And the trauma from life then permanently embeds those responses into your cells. Body work and touch and movement are all ways to keep loosening up those embedded cells, those places, right? So I want to say a bit more about this because when that happens, we don't even consciously realize that fear is working in the background. And that's why the invitation to it matters so much. So I'm suggesting that you are walking around with some of this, that your child self had to have seen or experienced things that fit this category of shock with no emotional processing. So when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I hope somebody will call in and talk about their relationship to fear. 202-570-7057.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
So, I'm Sam Parrotto, and you are at Expedition Self, and we're talking about the colossal nature of fear today. So, before we went on break, I said this sentence, and I'm going to say it again because it's really important as we go into this next part of the conversation. Your child self had to have seen or experienced things that fit this category of shock without being able to emotionally process. And that we are definitely walking around with pieces of this that haven't been complete or worked through. So if you can take the case that this is so, it lays the foundation for you to have compassion and empathy for fear in your life. And this is the most important place to start, which is appreciating what you've been through and what it brings with it. It's the gift I got when I studied fear during that year. It welcomes the idea that fear is welcome. It kind of lays a foundation for your humanness and your fragility and your soft spots. And when we can do this, we become more gentle with ourselves. And when we get more gentle with ourselves, we get more courageous and strong. Truly. I know, does that seem counterintuitive to you? Or have you discovered what I'm trying to describe? So the thing about feeling fear physically is that you can absolutely feel it. You know you're feeling it. You know there's an action being taken. And you absolutely know it's right there for you. So in this moment, I'd like you to check back into a scenario when you know you felt fear and see if you can remember what happens in your body. And while you're doing that, we've got a caller, Diane, who's going to share a little bit with us about her fear or talk to us about it.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you
Diane?
hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I started to talk about something else, and then because I called in and I got the gentleman on the phone, what he brought up for me is a conversation that the first time that I called in, and this falls into your fear category, and my reaction to it, the first time I called in and he answered the phone, I actually thought I was going to get you. And when he answered the phone, I hung up and I got scared. So I'm going to say that is a relatively new realization that I could put the fact that I really did get scared. I got embarrassed. I didn't want to talk. I wouldn't have hung on to talk to him because I thought I did something wrong. But what I really called about was the fact that when I was growing up, when I would face fear, and it didn't take me very long, that if I actually spoke, I really don't want to do this, I'm kind of scared, I was approached by adults that said, come on, do it. Once you do it, you'll never be afraid again. Mm-hmm. And it's taken me a long time to even get back there and say, I don't think I want to do that because I don't like that feeling. And today, I feel like I just got in touch with that. So I thank you for bringing it up and talking about this. It's made me think differently.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. And I'm going to address a little bit of that, the feel the fear and do it anyway, as if it's going to change it on the other side later in the conversation. But, I think when you share that, I get in touch with those moments where, it's easy to just ignore. So I really, really appreciate you, being willing to share it with everyone else as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I'll stay tuned.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I want to just come back to where I left you, which was, what does fear feel like in your body? And we were lucky enough to have Diane come on and actually describe a bit about the idea that she knew she felt like she was in trouble, or even like the idea that she hung up the phone. In my body, what happens when I feel fear is I lose strength in my muscles, and my cells register this loss of energy or an emptiness, like they're those pieces of gum, that used to have the juice in them, right? But there's no juice. And I can get nauseous, and I feel heat behind my eyes, and my temples and my throat tense up. And I lose connection, with my fingertips. So the thing about that, though, is that that's when you have a really obvious conscious fear response. But I'm going to talk today not so much about physical fears that bring those things out, like heights or spiders or bridges, which is one of my personal favorites, because, I want to talk about the ways fear makes its way into our lives. Fear is often wordless. we construct an internal configuration, a kind of hierarchy of acceptable ideas and strategies, and then we bury, or fear buries itself underneath all of those places. So it shows up in anxiety and frustration and passion and intensity and insecurity and discomfort and anger and logic and irritation and impatience. Okay, that's enough, right? I think we're more comfortable with those words and feeling those words than we actually are with the idea of feeling fear. Those adults that would say to Diane, just do it and you won't feel fear anymore. Those adults are saying, basically, we don't want to feel fear ourselves, so we don't want you to feel it, so we're going to get you over it. We don't like the direct feeling of fear in our bodies or the weakness of fear as an idea. So it has to find other outlets, like a rainstorm at the top of a mountain making its way down to the lowest point. So, we hear a lot about procrastination. Well, what that is fear. It's playing out as resistance. If we hold things off that we're afraid of, on one hand, we retain some perceived power with it, some sense that we're choosing and that we're in control. But simultaneously, we're also avoiding the thing we're afraid of, that we've built up in our mind, a lot of times even unconsciously. So all of that costs us moments in life, right? It robs us of this free flow expression of who we are. Fear can also work like a hidden power source. I hear people a lot say, fear makes me get things done. I do stuff. It gets us to take action we might not have otherwise done by heightening our senses, bringing the mind out of its ordinary routine, right? Its pattern gets us to react. Self-protection and defensiveness, they're really a byproduct of fear. And honestly, I think that goes on all the time, everywhere we turn, inside of ourselves and with all the people we know. Did you ever think, oh my gosh, everybody's that afraid? So one of the quickest ways to recognize fear in the space is when you are reactive or you're trying to fix or solve a situation without really spending the time and the patience to be with it, right? Rather than allowing the circumstance or the event to just exist, you find yourself wanting to do something about it, trying to really connect and slow down and communicate when you or someone else is feeling reactive. I think sometimes it feels almost impossible. Because this is when fear has a ton of power. Because reactivity is considered so normal, so acceptable as a way of interrelating. We don't actually recognize the true motivation for what it is. This is when fear is being worked through indirectly, has a kind of distorted, unproductive outcome. So I just want to remind you all about calling in. If you're thinking about fear, you have something showing up, or even just someplace you're exploring, number is 202-570-7057. So anything that's unknown will bring up fear. Lack of security of any kind, anything you didn't have enough of or you felt deprived of, it'll bring up fear. Not having choice or feeling powerless brings on fear. Not knowing how to do something is another big motivator, right? Because when we don't know how to do it, we're left in the unknown. And so then we can feel fear there. A long time ago, I ended up on a mountain for the very first time that I learned how to snow ski. And I really didn't choose it. And the more, I got up there and I got off the lift, I fell on my head. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared out of my mind because I actually didn't even realize it, but I kind of have a heights thing. And then I also was trying to move my body in ways that I didn't understand. So I had all this not knowing going on. And I want to tell you that 7 hours after that day, they took me down that mountain in a toboggan. I was so afraid, and I had a sense that I had no choice, that's really, it completely took over my experience. So, all right, I'm so excited. We've got another caller. Lindsey from Maryland. What do you want to talk about around fear?
Hi, Sam. How you doing?
great. Nice to hear from you.
When you said procrastination, I really connected with that. The interesting thing, though, as I was waiting to talk to you, is my heart is pounding, and I'm connecting with the physical ramifications of fear right now and talking to you.
Well, there it is. And look at you stay aware and conscious.
Yeah. So I've got a definitely rapid heartbeat and a little bit of nausea. So
I don't mean to laugh, but it's like awesome to put words on it and actually breathe through it.
Yeah, I just thought it was pretty funny that was coming up as I was calling to just talk about procrastination. But I guess I just wanted to check in with you on that. When you mentioned procrastination, it had me think like it's almost like the fear that I create for myself in that space by procrastinating and pushing it off is almost worse than just doing it. I don't know, than the fear of actually living up to the expectations, which I think sometimes is why I procrastinate, because I don't think I can live up to my expectations, or it's not perfect or right or whatever. Does that make sense?
It does, actually. The thing is that while you're talking to me about it here, I'm imagining it makes complete sense, but when you actually get right back into the moment, do you find yourself, you still procrastinate knowing that?
Very true.
Right? I think that's what's so hard about fear, is that we can start to know things about it, but when we actually get in the moment, unless we're really invested in, I want to bust up procrastination in my world, it kind of gets a hold of you again. Yeah. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm just thinking how easy. Yeah, I mean, procrastination is definitely easy for, at least in the way in which I'm envisioning it or connected to it here. It's kind of living up to a standard, or it's something that I push off because I don't feel like I can get it right. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk some more in the show about how to work with that in more depth. But I do think that the key, the first step of that is actually to say, I want to learn and understand procrastination. Like, I want to go towards it. So every time you feel yourself procrastinating, what you'd actually do in there is like sit down and write, or make a note of it in your phone, or acknowledge, hey, I'm writing procrastination. Let me see what I'm feeling. Just like what you did when you called in and said, oh my gosh, my heart's pounding and I feel a little nauseous. Right? The key to almost everything about going inside is to catch it in the moment it's happening and to acknowledge it rather than like kind of gloss over it. So you're halfway there by even thinking it the way you're thinking about it.
Okay. That's cool. That makes sense.
Okay. Awesome. Well, did you feel complete?
I do. Thanks, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right. So that's awesome. I just love when other people share their experience, right? It helps the learning for all of us when we get to hear it through someone else's lens. And I do battle with the procrastination piece and feel like I've pulled a number of pieces away from it, but I can always go another layer. So what's important to understand about fear is that it causes us to make faulty decisions when it's not made known or not seen. Like, you get rid of something too soon. You run away from a meaningful relationship rather than work through it. You back away from your teenager's woes because you don't really know how to handle it, or you try to solve everything that makes you afraid. If it's working behind the scenes, you can't really engage with it. And you're the one who relegated it to this kind of veiled position where it has to work through another aspect of self rather than being seen and appreciated for exactly what it is. Fear. Fear-based choices usually bring about a loss of something, right? Like, think about that. When I make a fear-based choice, a lot of times the very thing I'm afraid of is the thing that actually plays itself out. Of course, that's how we learn. We start to understand better and better. Whatever we aren't comfortable feeling inside the self will generally be the thing we feel afraid of in others. So if I don't like myself when I'm angry or intense, then I'll likely react the same way to others, meaning I will be afraid, right? Of them being angry or intense. And when we start projecting these things on others, we're really not able to see them clearly or relate. So again, we lose this chance to create more of everything when this happens. So here's the big news. Underneath it all, we're afraid of life, of reality, of having real personal power and the responsibility that goes along with it. We're afraid of what is so, and of loss, because life is loaded with all of that, with loss and the unknown, and suffering. So our very relationship with fear at its essence is like a direct parallel to our discomfort with the very nature of life. But we don't actually connect with it. We don't know it because we're trying not to be in touch with it. So it's playing a bigger role. We're kind of making it bad and wrong, something to conquer and get over the top of. And it's actually something we need to be connected with. So I bet you've all heard this phrase. Diane actually mentioned it. She rolled right in with it. Feel the fear and do it anyway. So, I don't agree with the way this gets played out. Because instead of actually consciously saying, I'm going to do this of my own choosing, I'm going to engage, I'm going to work with my fear, we actually are trying to get over it. And how can that possibly work in developing self-trust? So I think this is a good place to stop. If you find yourself thinking about fear and would like to call in and share your story, your perception of what we're talking about, that would be awesome. The number is 202-570-7057. When we come back from break, we're going to talk about manhandling some more and how we force ourselves to do things when we're afraid.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
So I'm Sam Parrotto, and you are on Expedition Self, and we're talking about fear. We're in this last segment, so we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to invite you to call in because you always add to the content and the conversation and the depth of what we're doing. So I left us on this idea that we are going to talk about manhandling and forcing ourselves to do things we're afraid of. It doesn't actually remove the fear. And in some ways, it has us just be afraid of ourselves, because when we force ourselves to do something, we're creating the very thing we're afraid of. I know that seems kind of odd, doesn't it? It's like, how does that work? So I'm manhandling and forcing myself to face my fear. And then when I do that, now I'm afraid of the aspect of myself that actually did it. right? We want a more collaborative, interactive, supportive, like open relationship with ourselves. So there's a number of ways to think about fear that I've discovered. I think they make a difference in providing the self a way to march into life with a more supportive and dynamic relationship with fear. And by taking these on, you're going to be able to get more in sync with your sense of power and your inner security and your connection with more than just that one part of yourself that would push yourself through. And it opens up your capacity to be at risk. So the first one is about looking at your whole journey, right? We have to go back through life and we have to think about what was scary. I mean, we're lucky because Diane talked about that for like all of a sudden she's looking at where she was afraid from a perspective that's new. Because a portion of what you're scared of is tied to tangible events or relationship moments that you lived through prior to today. In fact, maybe it's tied to more than one of them. Remember that part where humans want to leave the past behind? Well, this is another example of where leaving this investigation and understanding that can come from looking, it keeps us limited and unable to really get the gems and the treasure that comes from doing that. So we could say that your inner child might have been afraid, but your adult is not now. But I'm suggesting that you still have fear from that time. And just because you've learned how to take care of yourself in the now, it doesn't mean you're not still managing feelings from before. Believe me, the world is a big and scary place for a child, for all of us as children, although, we learned to get along, right? And we learned how to navigate relationships and we figured out how to do the journey. But in the best of circumstances, it was still filled with fear. And of course, many parents don't really stop and deal with fear in an easy way or a collaborative way. So we get left with that as well. The messages that we get about feeling fear are to ignore it or to climb on top of it or to block it or to make choices that don't bring it up or to defy it. So safety and security at home, when it's not fear-driven, it does help us to create a more healthy relationship with fear. But every child being different and having the things that cause them to feel what makes them afraid, that what happens in there is that you can have one child that feels afraid and one child that doesn't in the very same scenario, but it's important that you claim that for yourself. So this is the second thought for working with fear. Understanding that life is a risk and accepting this layer beneath layer is a helpful container for working with fear. And we have to do this with our eyes wide open, not just blindly pushing into the abyss. So the more we understand the qualities of risk, and you can noodle through the specific risks to us, the more the mind can settle into a place where it at least doesn't fight or reject things that are risky out of hand. I guess I want to talk a little bit about people, you might be either one of these, who seem to be impulsive or take unnecessary risk, right? Or those who seem to avoid risk altogether. This is that fight with life and fear that I referenced earlier. And it's a great way to notice the need to look at fear more directly. Like how you work with risk tells you a lot about what's going on with you and fear. And your story is one that only you can truly face and own. And that's a risk in and of itself, right? Where there's risk, there's fear, even if it inverts itself and feels like excitement or courage. So is this something you've thought about? Like how fear can make itself appear like motivation? All right, we've got another caller. Denise from Arizona. What have you got to say about fear?
Hello.
Hello. So what's on your mind around fear?
Well, pretty much everything that you mentioned feels like the end of the thing. As a child, I lived afraid, and it was expected. It felt expected that I needed to do what my parents asked, even though I was terrified. So when Lindsey called in and was talking about her heart racing and nausea, my sense is in my chest and solar plexus. And from the procrastination to the anxiety through fear living out of every moment. What you said about
Denise, I'm losing you. I can't quite hear anything you're saying. I think our connection's wobbly.
Can you hear me
now? But I think what I heard you last say is that you feel like you've lived with a whole lot of fear to work with because when you were young, you felt fear all the time. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, yeah, I was connecting to everything that you were talking about, how we live out and how our relationship with fear now. I hadn't thought of it in the way that you were talking about, coming from where and how I lived it as a child.
I see. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I say thank you, but I mean, that sounds like something that's meaningful in terms of your own work with your fear.
Yes.
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 Well, thank you for calling. And was there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, loving your shows. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you calling.
All right. Bye.
Okay. So, I think I just want to stop for a moment and say we probably don't spend enough time talking about fear. It's just not like a forward moving, how am I creating life? And yet it is like a big anchor or a drag on us. And the more we can alter that and make it something that is interesting to us, it has to lift. It has to create some sense of freedom out of that. So this third idea has to do with being rational and reasonable about the realistic nature of fear. So debunking fear is one of the ways to help the self to recognize that the thing you're afraid of is not as scary, right? It's part of coming into relationship with fear. So Lindsey, when she talked about the things she's afraid of, she could spend time in there really looking at what's the possibility that she won't live up to her own expectations. How does she play with those expectations? We don't want to rationalize it away because the sensation of fear, as long as it's present, is asking you to pay attention. But putting words on what you think you're afraid of, it really makes a difference as you're first kind of rationalizing and working with that and then bringing the words to it next. So these words, when you move towards it step by step and inch by inch and understand exactly what you are afraid of and then really looking at what the risk is, this is a way to empower yourself. So step by step, what does that mean? Well, it's not like a giant step. It's a snail's pace. And sometimes you even have to go left to go right. Like by working on an entirely different arena or scenario, you'll notice that when you return to the space where you were most afraid, it's altered. So I want to just go back to Lindsey, your example. So you're talking about your expectations. So one of the things you might find is you might work on some place that you always deliver on your expectations. And you might notice, what does that feel like and what's really happening? And you might take on a project where you know you can actually do that project. And while you're doing it, then you think about the times when you feel like, wow, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to deliver on that expectation. So you're practicing over on this one side that's easier to bring yourself back to the other side. So the more in sync you get with your whole self, which means you're not riding roughshod over the less valuable or acceptable parts of the self. Just so y'all know, my nose runs when I get on this show. And so somewhere around now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need a tissue. So, all right. So the more, I want to say this again, that when you're not riding roughshod over the less valuable or acceptable parts, you have choice. And when you're not functioning in life as unconsciously, then this flow happens. So the more you look to what you can learn from the events and to use them as occasions to feel and invite discomfort, to be in this not knowing, the more life works for you. I have a quote from Jim Morrison here. It's really short. Expose yourself to your deepest fear. After that, fear has no power, and the fear of freedom shrinks and vanishes. You are free. So the sixth idea has to do with recognizing that fear layers itself up. And by validating this, it gives you a way to take the case that there's always something you can't see. And this is one of the most helpful ways to work with the unknown in life. One of the biggest fears I think we all have, because you get really grounded and at peace with this idea that there's always more we can't see. So when our personal mindset is based on the idea of knowing things, you're actually setting up fear, because anytime you find out you didn't know something, it's going to rock your foundation and then make you afraid for the next time you don't know something. It is so much easier to get comfortable with not knowing. And in some ways, this is what opens the doorway to having the courage to pursue things you never would have imagined. Because being willing to fulfill each day from a place of not knowing is one of the most powerful transformation tools I know. And so the last idea has to do with surrender. You'll be okay. What does that mean? Because sometimes you're not okay. This is a very intense slope of going inward. You might find that most of the time you've been okay. Things work out to your best advantage. Go ahead, do it anyway. You'll get over the fear. And you may find that there have been times when it really wasn't okay, that you lost something or someone that was really important, or you couldn't handle what came your way and life was permanently altered. I think this is where surrender comes in. Because surrender doesn't just happen with a snap of a finger. It happens as we reach a place where we get clear on what is ours to transform and what is true about life. So oftentimes put in words like that which we cannot control, but it's really the acceptance of a certain powerlessness that what we would choose for ourselves isn't necessarily how it will go. And we have to make peace with this somehow without giving up all the places we actually do have choice. And this is one of a big growth area, because I think a lot of people decide they've surrendered, that they don't have power, when they actually do. And it's kind of like it's got this juxtaposition to it. And if we can keep sorting that out when we look clearer, it gives us a lot more room to get peaceful about what life is and to take on all these amazing places that are really ours to affect. So choice and having it, recognizing where it's missing and empowering it. If we are to have a shift in our relationship with fear, then we have to see choice in everything. And being able to develop self-trust, it definitely alters how much fear stays in control rather than as a collaborator. See, the self-trust comes from indulging in the fear and really trying to understand it. It comes from your worldview and what you're committed to, how much consciousness you really want in life. You have to want to feel, because if you don't want to feel, then you'll be overpowered by life at every turn, because it's the feeling space that acts like lubrication for the hard edges that we bump up against and get scraped by. And it's getting comfortable feeling that allows you to let more in and to slowly but surely work through all those places that never got talked about, that live in that place of being shocked, where we were shocked, where we were surprised, where we didn't know how to process through things. And the last one is the super important feeling of being willing to be embarrassed and humiliated. I know it's super bad news. It feels awful in the body, but there is nothing that holds the self in more than being afraid of those things. So, all right. Well, I want to say thank you so much for participating with me on the show and for coming on and allowing yourself to go inside while I talk about fear. Our next week's show is about communication, but I would love to know what kinds of subjects you're interested in. And so on my page at samparrotto.com, I'm going to add a little section where you can make suggestions about what topics you'd like to talk about. As always, I'd like to end with a short poem by J.L. Wyman. And it's a poem that doesn't actually have a title, but it is definitely about fear. All right, here goes. I understand fear. The fear of failing, of letting go, of being vulnerable, I also understand choice. The choice to sit on the edge and gently test the water with timid toes, or take the plunge and feel what it's like to let freedom wash over you as you let the judgment go. The conclusion is this: I hope you choose to swim through this life, even when your heart feels like it is drowning in fear. I loved that poem when I found it. I was super excited. I just want to leave you on another note. There's a poem called Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson, and you can find that also on my site after today. I think it's worth reading. I love it, and it's gotten a lot of play over the years because it talks a lot about that our deepest fear is really about being powerful beyond measure. And I hope as you leave the show today that you're in touch with your own power, to do your own growth work, to learn about yourself and really embody all that you're meant to be and able to be. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day.